Tonight on the Struggle Isolation Edition, a look at the princes of the pandemonium, the link between Sydney Cove and COVID-19, and international travel takes a different kind of blow. Cruises, not that kind. That's better. They're known for relaxation, wining and dining, and helping couples over 60 spend their retirement savings. But recently, due to poor crisis management, these floating resorts have had a hard time keeping their heads above water. Cruise ships have been recognized as one of the worst sources for COVID-19, the Ruby Princess being a prime example. The ship that docked at the Sydney harbour on March 19 has been linked with 20 deaths in Australia, and is believed to be responsible for more than 10% of Australia's coronavirus cases. 2 of the passengers are thought to be the reason behind the outbreak in Tasmania. Passed on from healthcare worker to healthcare worker at the end of the shift changeovers, they ultimately led to an outbreak of 114 cases in the state's northwest. Before the pandemic, cruising was a lucrative business, generating $150 billion per year and supporting more than 1 million jobs worldwide. But sailing the high seas is not really gonna be the first choice for a holiday once things return to normal. So the question is, will coronavirus sink the cruise ship industry? Let's hear from our health correspondent, Con.
Hi, I'm Conrad Descent, and I'm here to deliver an important announcement. The Ruby Princess has landed us up in Ships Creek, and that's why I'm here to deliver a promise to you, Australia, to stop the boats. That's right, stop the boats. Over 10% of COVID-19 cases have been caused by one boat. Yes, you heard me correctly, one boat. And there's only one way to avoid another health pandemic like this again in Australia, and that's why in 2021 I'm saying no. No to cruise liners, no to luxury cruises, no to ocean cruises, river cruises, adventure cruises. I'm even saying no to yachts. So we will not discriminate. So for all you newlyweds, nearly deads, and women called Karen, no, you better replan your holiday, because in 2021 it's time to stop the boats and say no to cruises.
Authorised by Citizen Health Correspondent, Canberra.
Right then, Tony. Gone. Moving on, and one of the most cherished institutions of the culture wars, the battle for Anzac Day, came a little late this year, and in a new twist, didn't mention Anzac Day at all. This new skirmish came courtesy of Dr. Annelies van Diemen, Victoria's Deputy Chief Health Officer for Communicable Disease, who tweeted, "Sudden arrival of an invader from another land disseminating populations creating terror forces the population to make enormous sacrifices and completely change how they live in order to survive. COVID-19 or Cook 1770. Not to be dissuaded by Dr. Van Diemen's essential role in combating the worst public health crisis of the century. The culture warriors of the yellow press and the government benches mustered their forces together and stuck on bravely to defend the honour of one of the luminaries of the illustrious British Empire, from the ignoble suggestion that he or any officer of Her Majesty's Royal Navy could possibly have left a legacy of dispossession, disease and death. We go now to our culture war correspondent Penelope Cole for more.
Thanks, Tavleen. See, the battle for Anzac Day played out a little differently this year. You see, normally a member of the public, say a Sudanese Australian writer or an SBS sports reporter, will exercise their free speech by posting something on social media that veers uncomfortably far from the hagiography we expect on such a hallowed day. Then the culture warriors of the News Corps will counter-attack with personal attacks, muckraking, plenty of crocodile tears and the occasional death threat. For several years now, the battle has been won by the Corps, with their opponents being fired from their jobs, subjected to routine harassment and threats of violence, and in some cases being run out of the country. This time, however, the history in question goes back way further than our Anzacs, to a figure and a time even more rose-tinted in our memories, to Captain James Cook, a British explorer and an unsuccessful kidnapper. Dr. Van Diemen's tweet comparing Cook's legacy in Australia to the threat of COVID-19 has enraged white-armed historians of the News Corps deployed their forces en masse seeking the doctor's skull. Riding alongside the corpse were the stormtroopers of the Federal and Victorian Liberal parties who called for Dr. Van Diemen to be fired. The sound and fury of talkback radio, tabloid editorials and morning TV has signified nothing this far, and with the doctor maintaining her position and the globe still in a massive pandemic, Dr. Van Diemen is an essential worker for Victoria's health system and has done more for the country in the past 2 months than any culture warrior has collectively in their entire career. Back to you, Tavleen.
Thanks, Penelope. We're off to a short break. Welcome back. In other news related to coronavirus, a Victorian meatworks has stopped processing since it was identified as the epicenter of a COVID-19 cluster. And while this is yet another example of a business being affected by the pandemic, there is little talk about the other party being impacted by the abattoir closure: vegans. Where will they find animals to rescue from now? And the state opposition leader, Michael O'Brien, has likened the cedar meats with the Ruby Princess debacle, which doesn't quite add up because there's nothing that is related with cruise ships that says cattle class. More seriously, Victorian Premier Dan Andrews stated that Victoria has the world's best contact tracers and are doing an outstanding job in tracing the spread of the virus. And while they attempt to control the spread of the disease, industries across the board are trying to work out ways in which they can get back into action safely. With the NRL set to resume later this month, ScoMo believes that players should be injected with the flu shot or be banned from the competition. Yup, it's like a no jab, no play policy, much like the one enforced on childcare centres. Now, if that's the same reasoning behind this vaccination, then that leads us to think that players must be running amok the camp like irresponsible children. With large domestic get-togethers still prohibited, the idea of international travel seems inconceivable. But there is a glimmer of hope. An idea of trans-Tasman bubble has been floated, which would see Australia and New Zealand reopen their borders as restrictions are being eased off. This would of course kickstart tourism, revive the now extinct concept of holidays, and reunite families. But none would be happier than the Australian PM himself. I mean, ScoMo loves giving things to New Zealanders, be it wombat, coal, or even deported Kiwi criminals.
If you're convicted, once you've done your time, we send you home. That's what the Australian policy is.
While the trans-Tasman travel idea won't eventuate for quite some time still, we cross to our fangirl, Sophia, to pump a bit more air into this spherical fantasy.
Oh, thanks, Tavleen. Look, I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of sick of this lockdown. All these rules and regulations. Don't go here, don't go there. But it's totally fine if it's for your hair. I'm over it. It feels like all the joy has been sucked out of the world. I mean, now that weddings are nothing more than a date with 3 chaperones and The Bachelor stopped filming, everything seems pretty glum. But I think I've got just the fix. All this talk of a trans-Tasman bubble being created so that in the not too distant future, Australians might be able to head across the ditch is great. But it could be better. What if we took it one step further and got Australia and New Zealand to merge and become one country? Hear me out.
That would make traveling to New Zealand like traveling to Tasmania. And given interstate travel restrictions will be loosened before international ones, before you know it, we'll be on a domestic flight to Wellington in no time.
Sure, there might be some logistical issues, but they're pretty trivial. I mean, we'd have to choose between ScoMo and Jacinta as our Prime Minister, but come on, I think it's pretty simple. Anyhow, our flags are basically the same, and if the biggest difference between us is whether we say thongs or jandals, I think there's not much of an issue. Look, we fought alongside each other in times of global conflict before. Now's the time to band together, and what better way to do so than with an official union symbolizing our eternal bond to one another. Australia, let's get hitched to New Zealand. Back to you, Tavleen.
I don't know whether we should be hearing wedding bells or alarm bells. Anyway, we're off to a quick break. And here we are again. With businesses struggling to remain open in this coronavirus-ravaged economy, restaurants and cafes of Chapel Street have banded together and decided to try and create the world's largest drive-thru. With roads off the street, there's plenty of space to create a temporary drive-thru service where consumers can order and receive food from the comfort of their own cars. This new concept is being referred to as in-car dining, encouraging locals to support their favorite restaurants despite social distancing restrictions. Fancy. The masterminds behind this initiative, the Chapel Street Precinct Association, have stressed on ordering food directly from the restaurants, which would mean that struggling Aussies would not have to share their profits with foreign-owned delivery apps such as Uber Eats and Deliveroo. The initiative is being trialled at more than 150 restaurants and cafes, with the hope that thousands could remain in their hospitality jobs. But with ScoMo saying that one of the first things to open as restrictions ease off would be restaurants and cafes, looks like this Meals on Wheels is here for a limited time only. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. If you're getting bored, try out online exercises. Just not tightrope. Until next week, the struggle, it's real.